Many speedrunners who try to run games at marathons have an ideal scenario in their head of how the run will go. You've got your friends and maybe some community members riding shotgun, maybe doing commentary, or at least somewhere in the chat or crowd. You ace every trick in the early sections and decide to just go for all the hard strats. If it doesn't work out, oh well, you can go back to the safe route. It's nerve-wracking, but in the end, you hit everything you need to, call for time, and realize you just got a world record. All that time you finished underestimate is now reserved for celebrating your accolade with whoever's watching. Assuming the marathon isn't behind schedule. Make no mistake, getting a new record at a marathon is incredibly rare. Even the GDQ or ESA marathons, which usually show off around 140 to 170 runs in a week's time, can go the entire event and maybe see one world record. Believe it or not, I had this scenario play out during one of the biggest speedrun marathons out there. Except the new record was the only part that actually happened. The rest was a train wreck. Even though this run was a record at the time, I hate how it turned out. Despite whatever went right with the run itself, there was so much that went wrong outside of and around it that I didn't go back to watch any of it until a few months later. Let's get this over with. Awesome Games Done Quick 2017. By the time this run took place, I'd already done a hosting shift and a speedrun of Battle Clash, both of which went alright. I'm the kind of person who gets at least a little nervous doing any sort of performance in front of an audience. And make no mistake, doing a live speedrun is in large part a performance. I was scheduled to run Dragon's Lair for the SNES as part of the Awful Block, a late night, early morning set of times which is the usual spot for games that are not so good. Perhaps as a harbinger of things to come, stuff was going wrong before the run started. Due to my aforementioned nerves, I planned to have 2 couch commentators along for the ride, one of whom was already at the venue, and the other who would drive in later. However, the latter person got penned in for a work shift the next morning and couldn't come, and the guy who was already there got violently ill the day/night of the run and spent the next couple days cooped up in his hotel room. So it was just me, trying not to look lonely on the couch. Hey, they gave me the option to use it instead of the chair, and I'm not going to turn that down. My appearance didn't help either, with my gloves being a frequent target of the Twitch chat and the comments section. I have bad circulation in my hands, which makes them get cold and dry out easily. It's bad enough that in the colder months, the backs of my hands will dry out, crack open, and bleed if I'm not almost constantly moisturizing them. Because of the amount of heat-generating equipment in the GDQ space, they often have the air conditioning turned up to 11 to try and compensate, even for winter events. But it usually just makes any space more than 6 feet away from the computer rigs cold. So they're not speed gloves, but just what I normally wear when it's cold. Shorts and a t-shirt though, I'll wear that all year round even if it's snowing. That was somewhat beyond my control, but something that wasn't was the route of the run. At this time, Dragon's Lair SNES routing was still in its infancy, and about 3 hours before going live, I was practicing the game and came up with a couple new damage boosts to save a not so insignificant amount of time. I was only hitting the most important one about half the time, but figured it would be worth trying anyway. The trade-off was that I had to hit a bunch of other things just right to not take too much damage and lose lives when I wasn't supposed to. See, a game over in Dragon's Lair SNES means going back to the last boss you defeated. In some cases, this can mean getting thrown back 3 or 4 stages. It also resets your weapon, which, considering some bosses and enemies all but require certain weapons to end the fight quickly, or in the bat's case, not make it nearly impossible to beat, a game over is very costly. I was already nervous to start the run, since one of the first things that happened was a dragon head spawning in a place that forced me to slow down. Their spawn locations are random, and part of me took that as a bad omen.
So, okay, that's already bad.
Later in the run, I took a couple deaths in places I absolutely shouldn't have, and even knowing where to find extra lives and health pickups did absolutely nothing to steady my nerves. Hell, I was less stressed playing Battle Clash while facing away from the TV and aiming with a mirror than this. Now, when nerves kick in during a GDQ run, the number one thing to fall back on is asking for donations. It gives you time to breathe and just focus on the game. And that's what I did on a couple occasions, when I wasn't stumbling over my own words at least. Unfortunately, this happened.
You can go ahead and just fire through some donations while I'm going through this. Oh, I hope that placement was good.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You can see me look over to where the hosting station is, and what I saw was 3 or 4 GDQ staffers standing around the host having some sort of conversation. I couldn't tell if it was a tech problem or just casual conversation, and no one said anything in the headset I was wearing, so I didn't know what was going on. There's this thing in psychology called catastrophizing. It's an irrational thought process where a person assumes a worst-case scenario to be true, then assumes the worst-case scenario resulting from that worst-case scenario to be true, and so on and so on. For example, I was late to work, and because of that I'll get fired, and because of that I won't be able to afford the rent, and because of that I'll get evicted, and it just goes on. It can be outright debilitating, and that's what I was starting to do during this run. As words just started falling out of my mouth, jokes started and awkwardly stopped, thoughts about the game and the run got cut off and started over multiple times, I was already thinking about how I'd never be invited back to a GDQ event, and my followers would see this and stop watching my streams and videos, and did I really want to keep making videos after this? And I honestly don't know how I ultimately held it together because I felt like I was dying inside. Still, I got to the final level and finished the run.
PB! Yes!
When I let out that yell and fist pump after beating Singe, it wasn't just for the new best time, but for surviving what I thought was an absolute clusterfuck of a run. Granted, I didn't break any rules in the process, but I can't call it a good showing. I actually thought for some time, even considering that I don't submit runs to every event and the massive amount of submissions for every GDQ event, that this run was keeping me from being invited back. I thought that even though I finished well under estimate, didn't break any rules, and alright, I did embarrass myself, but not nearly as much as other runners in some of the event's more infamous runs. Then this past summer, I wound up running for SGDQ 2020. So I guess it worked out. Except for the part where that Dragon's Lair run is still up for anyone to watch. 9 days later, I started streaming more runs of this game, but it wasn't strictly to set a new best time and get better at the run, so much as it was an exorcism. I felt like if I didn't get that run behind me as quickly as possible, it was going to continue lingering in the back of my mind, and that would keep me from being able to move on and continue having fun with speedrunning. I did manage to beat the AGDQ time, but even so, it wasn't getting that time that helped me get over the run. It was moving on to other games, hooking up with other runners, helping with other events, and just generally not letting the run hang over my head like some speedrunning sword of Damocles. Not quite the right analogy for this scenario, but still. Bad runs are more than just slow times, and they will happen. Some just happen to be on bigger stages than others, and they only dictate who you are or what your future may hold if you let them do so. Don't let any one run, much less a bad one, define you. Especially not when it's Dragon's Lair for the SNES.